Got plenty of friction left in your souls. Well, spiritual practice has sometimes been described by a Tibetan teacher as like the wearing out of an old pair of shoes, wearing the soles thin, wearing through ego and delusion. You may approach your spiritual thinking with the idea that you are going to practice to become enlightened, to become a great teacher, have fantastic powers that people will admire. You know, but during the practice, you come to realize that you are no longer attached to whether people respect you or not for your spiritual acumen. You really aren't motivated by the idea of being known as a really fantastic teacher. What you want to do is to be helpful, to be of assistance, to be a benevolent entity amidst the life of people. There are many ways to arrive at that point. This is one. Her voice was tired. It spoke of a heavy load that she'd carried far too long. Reverend Chad, this is Trudy. I don't know whether you remember me or not, but Unity helped me out a little while ago with some used tires so I could get my car inspected. I vaguely recalled the tires, but couldn't remember Trudy or her situation. But she's not alone. We receive any number of calls every month from children of God working out variations of Trudy's predicament. My mom used to call it surviving a champagne country on a beer budget. There's a whole bunch of us doing that now. And Mom knew wherever she spoke. Life had dealt her that hand in 1939 as a 28-year-old single parent to 3 kids, 5 and under. And a husband who'd gone off to Puerto Rico for a Depression-era job and didn't come back. We wound up down in Florida after a 1-year stopover at Grandpa Greer's hog and tobacco farm up the hollow here in Sugar Grove, right outside Boone. Survival was a little easier in those days. At least it seemed to be in Florida, which may well have influenced Mom's choice to move there. Folks lived and worked in the same neighborhood. Owning a car wasn't mandatory. Monthly payments, insurance, tax, gas, tires weren't either. A pair of shorts and a t-shirt sufficed as a wardrobe. Labels were irrelevant. Shoes were optional. Winter required only a light blanket to keep off a night chill now and then. Kraft dinner was a staple. You might remember it. Blue and gold box. The printing on the outside said 8 cents feeds a family of 4. Yeah. And so it did, ever so often. But no one complained. Trust me, there were no gourmets in the family. Even so, as my brother and I, as Denny and I got a little older and more experienced, our hunting, fishing, and gathering expeditions added an abundance of local culinary delights to our daily diet, including delicacies like mangoes and oranges and bananas and tangerines and coconuts and clams and oysters and pompano and red snapper and mullet and shrimp, crabs and the southern spiny lobster the locals called bugs. We ate like royalty, folks. My Florida childhood in the 40s was way beyond survival. I remembered it being a rich and exciting adventure played out on an unpolluted paradise, free of both environmental degradation and TV-driven commercialism. I didn't have to deal with the fantasy that my life was impoverished because I wasn't munching out regularly on fast food fare or wearing Nike's swoosh and faithfully collecting every new Game Boy that showed up at Toys R Us. Still, I was aware that it got a little dicey around the house when rent time came, the light bill, or a trip to the doctor showed up. For sure, we weren't, as Mom used to say, living high off the hog. But something was going on uniquely to the times that took most of the sting out of being, shall we say, as materially poor as the proverbial church mice. In addition to the blessing of being pre-TV, thus clueless about what we were missing, we were also living in a World War II culture of imposed simplicity. Due to the war and the rationing that came with it, everyone was making do with a lot less. Voluntary and involuntary simplicity had struck. Conspicuous consumption was no longer envied or admired. In fact, it was deplored, while conservation and tightening the belt were applauded. I remember being proud of how our Spartan lifestyle was helping win the war. As artificial as it was, I was being introduced to the process that leads to what the Buddha called the greatest gain. An abiding sense of contentment that flows from living light on the land in the blessed state of voluntary simplicity. As true as that is, I have no illusions that Trudy and her kids think of themselves not as patriotic or spiritually blessed, as someday they will, I pray. It seems our tendency to be preoccupied with the material world, also known as worshiping mammon, is a lot more ingrained now than it was 70 years ago. I suppose it's primarily due to two undeniable facts. First, there's a lot more stuff around these days to be discontent about. And second, most of us seem to be as dense as ever regarding the source of authentic contentment. So much stuff out there, so little time, so little money. Alas, life is so empty. Oy vey, oy. So goes the tragedy. On the billboard at the Theater of Longing, a self-imposed melodrama written, produced, directed by, and starring me and you. Me and you. The storyline: more is better, now is best. Get it while it's hot. Go for it. The multinational makers and movers of stuff are leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to condition the planetary family to want as a way of life, to buy deeply into the myth that happiness emerges from accumulating more money, more symbols of wealth, more fame, honor, and notoriety, more power, sex, and education. The perfect job, the trophy mate, the perfect kids accumulate and acquire ad infinitum, ad nauseum, ultimately. The seductive rationale the wanting mind charms us with is the notion that fulfillment, the realization of our desires, will make us happy. The truth is way otherwise. Even a cursory look at the fairy tale will puncture the myth and show you that the practice of wanting more and more and more provides you with only one experience: a significantly enhanced sense of disappointment and frustration. You may have noticed. Interestingly enough, it's helpful to see our dilemma is not about failing to satisfy our desires. The real problem lies in the fact that we constantly satisfy desire after desire and still find ourselves firmly stuck in the theater of longing, wanting more and more and more. Stop for a moment and think about it. Ask yourselves, how many lovely sensations, evocative thoughts, inspiring sights, beautiful sounds, delicious tastes, and rapturous feelings have I already experienced in my life? How many? Countless, countless, I would say. Infinitely more than we could ever possibly enumerate. But even all of that hasn't come close to providing the vast majority of us with a satisfied mind for any significant period of time. attempting to cultivate the 1 in 1,000 rarity of a truly satisfied mind by accumulating a huge collection of ego's status symbols turns out to be as futile as believing you can make a tasty chicken salad out of the other stuff. It's simply not going to happen. So where does this leave us? If endless episodes of acquiring and consuming provide no lasting meaning or purpose to our lives, why do we continue a treadmill fetish that has been defined as a symptom of insanity? You remember doing the same thing time after time after time, expecting a different outcome? Why do we continue indeed? The answer seems to lie in the probability that most of us still aren't picking up on the prime directive that informs our capacity to move through an earth life with an easy breath, quiet mind, a peaceful heart, and a relatively tranquil smile now and then. It's a major piece of spiritual savvy that you'll find as primary in the tradition of every monk, mystic, or wild-eyed prophet who has graced humanity with their impeccable insight on the art and science of contentment as way of life. Jesus laid it down this way. Lay up not for yourselves treasure on earth, where moth and rust consume, and thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consume, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there also is your heart. Amen. Heart. Is that beautiful? Does that cut right to the heart of it? It's an invitation to get real clear about where you ground your value system. Giving earth stuff treasure status locks us into craving, because that's what we are telling our heart it needs to be happy. Remember, where your treasure is, there also is your heart. Your whole feeling nature is invested in an outcome that you prescribe by assigning it that kind of value. Disappointment is inevitable because forces of change operate eternally on everything in the material domain. The moth and rust of his teaching, the thieves breaking through and stealing. And thieves take many forms. I had a little 6-year-old boy at one time back in 1965, and a thief called cancer broke through. And suddenly he wasn't part of my physical life anymore, leaving me an opportunity to learn to deal with that in a way that was so fulfilling ultimately. I can now truly be grateful for the opportunity to have to face that, to work through it, to see if it could be done. And it can be. Trust me, he's fine. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Andy was the one that called me in his room on the morning he passed and asked me, Daddy, who are the people in the room with me? Gee, I don't see anybody, honey. I responded, I guess you had a dream, sugar. And he looked right at me and said, oh, no, Daddy, you should be able to see them. Wake up, you old fool. Yeah. Treasure in heaven. Treasure in heaven indeed. The metaphoric moth and rust and thieves of his counsel will inevitably change all form, and quite often in ways that remove it from our witness, Andy, thus setting us up to break our hearts over our lost treasure. On the other hand, put a little energy into seeing what happens when you apply that same level of significance to the treasure within, the heavenly gifts of insight and spiritual maturity, compassion and understanding, all the moth-proof virtues that open our eyes to the delightful experience of contentment. I got a hunch that you'll soon be choosing not to give up a single peaceful breath for anything moving through the passing show of the world of form. After all said and done, we really don't need all that much to be supremely happy. Opting out of a value system anchored in the material domain will liberate us to enjoy the kind of contentment and simplicity that gives birth to a rich and prosperous sense of life unfolding a breath at a time in that mystical kingdom of the here and the now. As the energy of craving and acquiring gradually diminishes, we'll begin to experience a subtle liberation from the chronic dissatisfaction of the wanting mind. Serenity will become an old and constant friend, but the shift won't for a moment disengage us from our commitment to healing the sick, to giving the blind vision. In fact, we'll find ourselves ministering with greater enthusiasm than ever. Generosity will become a spontaneous expression of our liberation from materialism. We'll give generously of our time, our creativity, our treasure, our caring, whatever and whenever the opportunity blesses us. In closing, just let me say, thanks, Mom, for teaching me the mystical art of thriving in a champagne country on a beer budget. And I say the same for all of you guys. Thank you for that opportunity. Bless you.